Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained by this podcast? It's time to return to ancient Rome and revisit the 2000 film Gladiator, because your geek history lesson on that Russell Crowe movie is now in session. Hello and welcome to Geek History Lesson. I'm Jason Russell Crowe Inman.
I'm Ashley Victoria Robinson. Welcome to your Mind University, because you have stumbled onto the podcast where we take one character, construct, or angry Australian man from popular culture and teach you everything you need to know about them in about an hour. And today we are celebrating a movie that is very near and dear to Jason's heart. What's that, Jason?
Gladiator.
Yes.
Gladiator. It's a very simple title for, an ancient Rome movie, I think.
What else should it be called?
I don't know. Centurion?
I think there is a movie
Roman
called
man with
Centurion.
leather? This is all beside the point, because speaking of Roman men with leather, we need to introduce our very special guest. This is a man that we have been trying to get on Geek History Lesson for a very long time, but he is also a man that tends to travel, and luckily, he's at home right now. So I want to introduce you to our special guest. He is a comedian. He's a lover of the excellent beverage Coors Light, an all-around nice guy. Please welcome to Geek History Lesson, Mr. Mark Ellis.
Hey, kids. I feel like I'm letting everybody down because as we're recording this, I'm actually sipping on a Miller Lite. So I'm going against brand right off the bat.
We're going to have to end this podcast right now, Mark. I'm sorry.
Sorry to lose the sponsor for y'all.
Well, I'm very excited because, everybody knows you from Schmoes Know, Collider. Were you on AMC Movie Talk as well?
You know what? I think that was my intro into that kind of Collider Movie Talk world. I was like the last person to join AMC Movie Talk before it got rebranded or sold or however that all went down to Collider. So I got to be like the rookie during AMC Movie Talk. And then I, eventually got to do a lot of cool stuff over at Collider. And so it's been a good run between me and movies. I mean, going all the way back to Schmoes Know, which is probably where I first came across y'all's path, was just reviewing and talking movies and just geeking out over this kind of stuff.
Well, go ahead, Ashley.
I was going to say, Jason knew Mark before I did, and he used to be like, yeah, Mark Ellis, he's that really good comedian. That was how you were summed up for me for a really long time. And it turned out to be true, because now you are such a famous comedian that's your full-time gig.
Well, one of my favorite moments of doing stand-up during a Comic-Con was, I don't know if y'all remember this, in New York. I think this was probably 2017. I had a run of shows at New York Comedy Club during the Comic-Con weekend. And y'all, I guess, had nothing better to do that night. So you came to the show. And I remember that y'all were in the front row off to the side. And I did a bit about the Justice League. And it got a pretty big laugh. But then afterwards, I had to look at you, Ashley, and Jason to get the thumbs up to make sure that the canon was right with the joke. And apparently it was. I got the thumbs up from both of you.
Yeah, that night, the Mafia didn't have any jobs for me. So I just really thought I'd go to a comedy club.
For the record, we went to multiple Mark Ellis New York Comic-Con shows, not just that one.
Well, look, the Mafia is not busy on Thursdays. I don't know what to say.
Well, it's funny because when you're a comic, that's the closest, at least that I have gotten in my career, to feeling like I am a gladiator. And so to be in the Coliseum, as it were, and to look over at the two emperors and to get the thumbs up and not the thumbs down from y'all, that means a lot.
Well, it was very excellent. I also know you have an amazing bit on Wonder Woman as well. But enough of that comic book talk, because we're here to talk about real men with real swords getting sweaty.
Not real swords.
Fake swords. Because now we need to drop into the 10-cent origin part of our podcast. Ashley, what's that?
That is the first part of the podcast where we take you through all the basics, who's its and what's its galore, in case you ever go to a Gladiator-themed cocktail party and someone needs you to tell them about it.
All right, Gladiator is directed by Ridley Scott with a screenplay by David Franzoni, John Logan, and William Nicholson. It has a story by David Franzoni. Of course, stars Russell Crowe, Joaquin Phoenix, Connie Nelson, future Hippolyta, and Oliver Reed.
They're not going to give Dumbledore himself a starring credit?
Nope.
In the summary?
The release date was May 1st in the year 2000. Its budget was $103 million, and its box office was a huge $460.5 million. And again, as we said, this is the 20-year anniversary of this movie, hence the reason why we're talking about it. Now we're going to move on to the next section, the meet cute.
The meet cute is a term that we stole from romantic comedy writing, where we told you the first time we meeted this property and how cute it was. Jason, why don't you start us off and tell us how you first meted and cuted Russell Crowe at the height of his questionable attractiveness?
Well, I'm going to very quickly defer to our excellent guest because I'd love to hear his story about Mark, when did you first watch Gladiator, and do you remember your initial thoughts?
Okay, well, my initial thought is I take issue with Ashley's comment that he's questionably good looking. I mean, this is a stud of a man, Ashley.
I agree.
Hard disagree, but you know what? That means more for Mark.
It's more cell phone throwing goodness for me.
Yeah.
I actually first stumbled upon. I remember, quick backstory, seeing Russell Crowe for the first time in the Denzel Washington movie Virtuosity, being like, this guy's good. He's
that classic film.
And then, and then this movie Gladiator's coming out. And I remember seeing an ad for it, and my initial thought was, well, how could they take the name of that Cuba Gooding Jr. James Marshall classic from the early '90s called Gladiator? And then my buddy Doug and I, who we were both home from college. I believe we just finished our freshman years, and we were both home from college back in Williamsburg, and we were just, hanging out, catching up on our various college exploits, and we're like, let's go see Gladiator. And it ended up being just an awesome, awesome theatrical experience, and it just became one of those movies. I think I took my parents back to the theater like the next night to go see it because they were interested in it, and I gave the go ahead that it's good, and so we all went and watched it again. So I got a lot of Gladiator that opening weekend.
Mark, I just have to give you a free idea. If you ever write a sitcom, it needs to be titled My Buddy Doug. That is just genius.
Well, Doug actually factors pretty prominently into Schmo's lore because he ended up moving out to LA before I did. So I slept on his couch for about 3 months when I first moved out here to do stand-up, and he introduced me to Christian Harloff. He was the conduit.
Ooh, dang.
Oh, wow.
This is Doug's fault. Everything from 2000, basically 3 on, I can blame it on Doug.
Well, my meet cute for this movie is I saw this opening weekend in movie theaters. I was still in high school when this movie came out.
Just you wait.
Oh, yeah. And I was at a buddy's birthday party that night and, doing the thing. And then I remember somebody at the party suggested, hey, have you guys heard about this Gladiator movie? We should go see it. I've heard it's pretty good. So we got in the cars, and because we lived in the middle of nowhere, farm country, Kansas, it was, of course, an hour drive to the movie theater. And we sat down and watched the 3-hour movie Gladiator. And I can remember, this is a very special movie for me because when the credits rolled, and I don't know why it was this movie or this moment, but I was so taken with this movie that when the credits rolled, it was the first time ever I realized that people get paid to make movies. And that was the first time I ever realized, oh, wow, maybe this is something I want to do. Because all these people in the credits made this amazing piece of art, and that led to me owning the foreign print poster of Gladiator. I like the foreign poster better than the American poster, which currently sits in my closet and not framed. But that's my special story of Gladiator. Ashley, how did you first encounter this Russell Crowe goodness?
Well, I was in elementary school when this movie came out.
Oh, boo!
So I did not go see it in the theaters. I don't think I knew this movie existed until 4 or 5 years after it came out. I saw this movie when, after having lived in LA for several years, I met this cute guy from Kansas with a beard, and he heard that I had never seen Gladiator and said, that's one of my favorite movies. We're going to watch Gladiator. So I only saw Gladiator like 5 years ago.
Oh, wow.
But I think I've seen it 4 or 5 times since then.
Oh, yes, you have. All right, so now let's go into the main discussion of the episode. Just in case you have never seen this movie before, we just do want to throw out the spoiler warning, but this movie did come out 20 years ago, so if you haven't seen it by now, I'm sorry. I'm not really that worried about ruining it. So, Mark, I want to ask you, just off the top, what were your initial impressions? Because I think we both, us and you, watched this last night. So what were your initial thoughts watching this movie last night? Were you immediately like, oh, this is as good as I remember it, or this mostly holds up, or like, whoo, there's a lot of yellow in the color correction?
Well, I'll tell you what, there is a lot of yellow. The thing that I noticed, and look, so I either did too much research or I cheated. Y'all tell me, because I go on Amazon to rent this thing because I haven't seen it in probably like start to finish. I haven't seen it in a good, 5-6 years. And I saw that the director's cut was available. And I'm like, oh, sweet, let me get that. And it's like 15, 20 minutes longer than the theatrically released cut. And I noticed right away that it goes more into that opening battle. There's more scenes. There's a lot more violence and bloodshed than I remember seeing. And the director's cut is cool, but I had the same feeling that I had the night I saw it in the theater, and that was that this is a great movie. I can objectively say this is a great movie. However, it always feels a little long in the tooth for me in the middle. And I don't know if that's a me problem or a movie problem, but it always feels like there's just a little bit of fat in there in the middle that gets me a little sleepy. Am I crazy for saying that?
No, I don't. I don't think you're wrong on that idea. It's funny because I actually think the second act is the best act of the movie. And this is also one of those weird movies where you can clearly tell the delineation between Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3, because Act 1 is up until he gets scooped up by the slavers, and then Act 2 is all up until like he goes to Rome, and then Act 3 is all the Roman like political intrigue, like, oh man, Maximus is back stuff. And in that case, it sort of almost feels like 3 different movies. And I generally find that any movie that kind of does that, you always feel it's long in the tooth depending on which one is the least to your taste.
Yeah, I was going to jump in and say, and I said this to Jason when we watched it. So Gladiator and Braveheart, I think, are 2 movies that go hand in hand. And speaking in broad generalizations, I find that men tend to prefer Gladiator and women tend to prefer Braveheart. I think that's because Braveheart is a little more beautifully shot and it has a love story. And usually for the first half hour or so, I'm like, yeah, this is good, but I could be watching Braveheart. And then when he gets to the slavers, I'm like, oh no, this is a really good movie. So I think that's interesting that, Mark, you found that it kind of gets slow in the middle.
I do agree with you as far as the Braveheart comparison is that you can really see so many similarities in these movies. And halfway watching Gladiator last night, I was thinking, wait, is this the movie that is every man dies, not every man really lives? Or is that Braveheart? So I think that to both your points, it's very interesting to me, and I'm thinking about that 3-act structure now, and I think maybe the reason why it feels a little long to me is not the 2.5-hour running time. It's that the end of that first act is just such a downer when he rides back and he's just too late and his family's slaughtered, and it's just like you just don't feel like watching anything after that. You're so depressed.
Yeah, that is a downer. Oh, so I want to talk through the movie a little bit in order. So I want to talk a lot about this first act. So we're dumped into this movie in the year 180 AD in Germania, and it starts off as a medieval battle movie. And for me, the thing that always gets me in this movie every single time is the Hans Zimmer score. Immediately like pulls you in. And this is one of the few score soundtracks that I feel you can put on track 1 and never skip it all the way to the end. Whereas many other movie scores, I feel like it just gets so much about the drums that you just like, you're like, okay, generic action music, I get it. So what did you feel about being dropped, opening this movie with a giant battle that literally has nothing to do with the Colosseum?
I mean, you talk about locking an audience in right off the bat just because it's just such an epic scope. And I'm glad you brought up the soundtrack too, because that's something that I wasn't conscious of how much it was affecting me the first few times I saw this movie. But last night, it really got me, not just at the opening sequence, but throughout the movie. I was just so struck by how great the score is. But
I ended up humming certain pieces to Ashley because I just I've listened to this score writing so many times.
I went and learned how to play the main theme on the flute after watching it. So.
But yeah, you see that opening sequence, and it's just such a great battle. I put that up there with a lot of the great battles that we've seen in movie history, whether you want to go with the medieval Braveheart or you want to go further back into the ancient Roman times and movies that have displayed stuff like that. And naturally, just probably because I'm a child of the 90s, anytime you see an arrow lit on fire and shot, I think Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. And this did like 1,000 of them.
Yeah. Ashley, what do you think about the opening Germania sequence?
I think that Pirates of the Caribbean really lifted this theme with a little extra flourish. And I knew Hans Zimmer as the Pirates composer before I ever knew him as the Gladiator composer. So I have a hard time in that opening scene being like, oh, yeah, Jack Sparrow's not going to show up later. OK. I love any good fight because fake violence really I think fake violence is very much fun. Real violence scares me. I don't like watching people hit each other because I'm a delicate flower. And watching the aftermath of the opening battle, I actually think might be more compelling because there's a lot of period-specific tricks and shooting techniques that Jason's conspiracy theory stole from this. But when Richard Harris kind of comes down from on high, I think that's really, really fascinating. And they also sort of start this battle with Maximus's discussion with one of his lieutenants, where he says people should know when they're conquered, and Maximus says, would anybody, would we? And to me, those two sort of scenes that bookend this battle tells you exactly what this movie's going to be before you even get into it. And I mean, by the time Richard Harris is showing up and speaking lines, we've heard maybe 5 people speak. And I think the fact that there's like a thesis right at the start is really powerful.
Yeah, I want to talk about a little bit about how I think Gladiator, was a trendsetter for a lot of films in the 2000s. I think specifically in terms of some of the action, the way it's shot. I think they took I believe it's the 40-degree film shutter from Saving Private Ryan from the opening sequence of D-Day, and I think they used it more. They used it in a lot of like specific shots, and if you notice, a lot of action films in the 2000s do that same thing. To me, it's become so overused.
I mean, Lord of the Rings takes it.
Lord of the Rings. I also think we skip by this. I think it's a gorgeous shot. The opening shot of the movie, The Hand in the Wheat, that is copied by so many movies.
And video games.
It's interesting because, I do think that there is a pre and post Gladiator film world. I really do. And it's interesting because Gladiator is one of the first, I might be completely wrong about this, but it seems like it's one of the first kind of action movies to become a prestige movie, because it is sort of has its toes in both worlds.
Yeah, it's interesting how that's changed since Gladiator was released, because if you look back through the history of cinema, I mean, like in the 50s and 60s, when these swords and sandals, for lack of a better categorization, movies were coming out, they were the modern day comic book movies. Those were the big blockbusters that you couldn't wait to go see, even ones that were more biblically focused, like, whether it's Ben-Hur or it's the 10 Commandments. My dad would tell me stories about being a little kid, and like, those are the movies that when they come out in theater, you have to go see those in the theater. And then it's like Gladiator met at a perfect crossroads, because Gladiator got the prestige that those films decades earlier got. But then Gladiator also ushered in this new wave of copycats, like your Troys or your Alexanders or whatever, that just all of a sudden did not measure up to what its predecessors were anymore. And they almost became like farces of themselves.
Wait, you don't think Troy holds up to Gladiator? I don't know what you could possibly mean by
I walked out of that movie.
Orlando Bloom focus feature. I will say, though, I do think Troy, much like the Harry Potter films, the older generation of actors in that, like you got Brian Cox in that, Sean Bean is in that, really excellent.
Well,
Moving on.
Speaking of the older generation, we have to talk about what I think is one of the masterful performances in this film, Richard Harris as Marcus Aurelius. Now, Richard Harris is, for my money, such an underrated actor, and he should be an actor on the same level as Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen in pop culture. But because he died literally a year or 2 years after this movie came out, he was only in 2 Harry Potter films as Dumbledore. I think a lot of people have forgotten him, and this is one of the things that every time I watch this movie, there's a line in this movie in the very beginning in the battle where Richard Harris is trying to get up on his horse, and he's struggling to get his foot in the stirrup. Russell Crowe helps him, and Richard Harris throws away this line of, "Oh, the glory of Rome." And it's such a powerful line in the way he delivers it and everything like that. What do we think about Richard Harris?
There's a look that Richard Harris gives at the beginning of this movie when he's still sitting on the horse. And Ashley, I'm glad you brought up that first shot that you see him you see this vestige over the hill, and it's just this look that he's looking at the battle, then he looks up to something else. And in that moment, I'm like, give this guy a Best Supporting Actor. I know he's in the movie for 3 minutes, but it's just one of those things where he just lends such a credibility, not just to his role, but to the rest of the movie. And you're right, he passed away very shortly after this. And it's just one of those things where if that is your walk-off along with Dumbledore, then you should be noted as one of the great thespians of your day.
I absolutely agree. And it makes me even more impressed that Jared Harris has turned out to be anything like a good actor, because that doesn't always shake out that way. But I think he also, Mark, you talked about how he sort of grounds this movie and lends it a level of prestige. And I think it's because actors of his generation harken back to that sword and sandal era of movies. There's a moment later on when all the slaves are being freed and we see the keys being passed through the different doors that I feel is very Spartacus. And I think maybe it starts with Richard Harris at the beginning of the movie.
Oh, there's a lot of Spartacus references in this movie. It's hard not to make any ancient Rome movie and basically not be influenced by Spartacus, I feel.
Yeah, I think that you definitely see Ridley Scott nodding to the movies that he probably grew up loving. And when we get the battle that we see opening this movie, it really does. It does two things. It sets the stage for the epic kind of scope that we're going to get with this movie, but it also gives you the intimate emotional toll that this film is going to take on you, because it's not a hollow battle. It's not something where, it's just cool to see a lot of people fighting. You really get to know exactly who Maximus is. You even get to know exactly who Quintus is, because you see that he is subservient to Maximus, but you just have this feeling, and it's probably due because Thomas Arana is such a good character actor. It's like you just have this feeling that at some point this guy is going to have a knife in Maximus's back.
This movie is filled with amazing character actors. Oh, by the way, Richard Harris's final film role was 2002's The Count of Monte Cristo.
That classic.
That movie's not that bad. It stars Jim Caviezel.
Sure. It's not Jesus?
Yeah, it's not terrible. Yeah, movie Jesus.
Yeah.
Speaking of supporting actors, let's talk about, he was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for this role. He did not win. Joaquin Phoenix's Commodus.
I called Joaquin Phoenix until maybe 5 years ago that guy from Gladiator. Because even though I hadn't seen it for a long time.
Not fake Johnny Cash?
I've never seen that movie, so
oh my God!
So no.
Mark Ellis, do you want to come back for a Walk the Line?
Okay, you know what, Jason? I would, but I know that you're only bringing up Walk the Line so you can reference Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story somewhere.
I own both of those.
I don't know if you're joking or not, Mark, but Jason also loves Walk Hard.
I have been made aware.
I basically love everything Johnny Cash. I would make you guys watch the 1970s Johnny Cash Variety Hour if I could.
Do you love that picture of Johnny Cash where he's high in the bush eating cake with his bare hands?
I love everything about Johnny Cash.
Okay.
So funny.
I want to be...
Okay, so Joaquin Phoenix, he was great as Johnny Cash, but he did such a rare thing for an actor to be able to do, is that I think most actors, once we see them in their signature role, that's kind of how we view them. And it was what I was worried about early on when I saw Matt Damon in the movie School Ties. I don't know if you guys remember that. Brendan Fraser's the star, and Matt Damon is like this, kind of underhanded. He's a bully, and he was so good in that I didn't think I could ever feel anything emotionally in support of a Matt Damon character. Then Good Will Hunting came out, and I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. This guy's a good actor. Same thing with Joaquin Phoenix, because when I saw him in Gladiator, I was like, I am never going to like this human being. And then a couple years later, he was in Signs, and he's so good in Signs that I'm like, okay, I forgive you.
He is really good in Signs.
I think he's really good in everything. I mean, listeners to this podcast know that I have no time for the Joker movie that I haven't seen. I'm sure he's great in it. But what I admire, I love the scene where the kids are introduced, basically.
Lucius?
Yeah. No, not Lucius. Commodus, and I can't remember the sister's name.
The daughter. I'll look it up.
Sorry, I don't.
Is it Lucilla?
Yes, Connie Nelson is Lucilla.
Which is why her son's name is Lucius. I love their intro, and Joaquin Phoenix does something that not a lot of actors will do, and not a lot of male actors will do, is he raises his voice. That's not his usual speaking voice, and by doing that, and he adds these very effeminate flourishes, we know from that opening scene what their dynamic is, and we know that he's the bad guy. He's so good throughout this movie, and props to the costumer, because I think he has the best outfits. He starts with a blue outfit, and then he gets a black outfit, and then he dies in the white outfit. And I just think they get better as the movie goes along.
Now, I want to move us ahead a little bit to talk about the section of the movie after Maximus is scooped up by Proximo, played by the amazing and fantastic Oliver Reed, who, fun fact...
Who did.
Well, we're going to...
Yeah.
Wait, hold up, actually. I got two fun facts for you.
Okay.
One is, I don't know if you know, Oliver Reed hated Russell Crowe and tried to start a fight with him on set.
Honestly, respect.
And then the second thing, I don't know if you're aware about this, Mark. Oliver Reed died during the filming of this movie. He actually died after if rumors are to be believed, an $800 bar binge.
Holy smokes!
Now,
wow. That puts my beer drinking during quarantine in perspective, doesn't it?
Now I am not. I have no confirmation about this, but while I was reading that, but I don't know if you know this, Mark, but in the last two scenes that you see Proximo in Rome, that is a digital recreation of Oliver Reed's face on a body double.
Jason, this is going to be your lasting legacy to me. Is you're the guy who asked me to watch Gladiator before we did the podcast, and now you're going to make me watch this as soon as we're done taping. I can run back and see if I can notice anything.
You know, it actually holds up. I was looking for it when we watched this last night. It really holds up. There's only like one shot that kind of gives it away, but it's so interesting because I didn't think special effects were that good in 2000, although I don't know why I'm saying this, because this is 2 years from Gollum, and Gollum is like one of the best special effects of all time. But I'm generally surprised they were able to pull this off.
I'm impressed how well the effects still held up, because I was even like looking at like the tiger and stuff and the big scenes of the Colosseum. For a movie made in the year 2000, I think that, and especially it's tough to make effects from that era look good on a smaller screen, like on a TV screen. And I thought that they really held up magnificent.
At different points, you can see the birds flying, and the whatever physics engine they have on the birds doesn't really work the way birds work. So there's two shots where it's just a flock of birds against a pretty decent background. And those were the only times where I was like, oh, that's definitely fake, because of course it's fake. It's ancient Rome. I also, I know later on in the scene where, spoiler alert for a 20-year-old movie, where Maximus is being ceremoniously buried with representations of his family. That was not supposed to be Jawiin Hanzu.
Jabu.
That was supposed to be Oliver Reed. But
Juba, excuse me.
But then he was no longer with us.
Yeah, in the original script, it's Proximo burying Maximus's family relics. In the Colosseum because it's supposed to be a gladiator burying another gladiator. But actually, yeah, we talked about this after watching the movie last night, that I actually think it works with Diom and Hansu much better.
I do too. I understand from a story perspective why you would give it to Proximo, but I think by giving it to Juba, especially because they have that discussion when right before they're going to Rome about what do you think will happen in the afterlife and having to wait for your family, I think it's nice that he's the one who sort of symbolically sends him on his way.
So I want to lead us. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say for the Oliver Reed thing too, it's like he's so good in the movie in a way that I want to know more about his backstory. Do either of y'all know, was there, because I know that Ridley Scott wanted to go back to Gladiator at some point, and then to hear that this old guy used to be a gladiator and used to do what he's kind of coaching everybody else to do, was there ever any headway, or did I totally miss like some sort of prequel media that I could ingest that has Proximo as a young gladiator?
There is no prequel media or story to this movie, but there has been talk about several sequels to this movie. And Mark, that's what we're going to talk about on our episode of Geek History Lesson Extra on patreon.com/Jawiin. So thank you for that segue. So if you want 10 more minutes of Mark and us talking about what the sequels of Gladiator, I'm going to tell you every sequel that they were thinking about, because some of them are ridiculous, and then I would love for all of us to pitch it. But patreon.com/Jawiin, support the podcast.
I will also say that most of, at least the names of the characters and the broad strokes, with the exception of Maximus, they are based on real figures. So if anyone wants to do extensive Googling on Antonius Proximo, perhaps that's where we'll find our answer.
I have a lot of love for Proximo in this movie. I think, one, Oliver Reed is such an astounding presence in this movie, and the way he delivers lines, and like, I mean, even his simple like "ha" is so good. But he feels like a character that walked out of something like Ben-Hur and Spartacus. I think that's why he's so magnetic. And this leads me into my next question that I want to ask both of you. Proximo is in my favorite scene in this movie. My favorite scene in this movie is where it's Proximo and Maximus. And it's when Proximo is telling Maximus his origin, and he tells him about the wooden sword. I think Aurelius, I think is his name, or something like that. And it starts out with like, you want a boy, you want a girl, you want a camel, whatever he's like trying to bribe Maximus with. And it ends with Proximo, Oliver Reed, giving this line that to me sounds like it comes out of a 1960 movie, but because he delivers it so well, it's so amazing, where he goes, and we'll go to the capital and we'll have bloody adventures like together. Mm-hmm. And I just think like that is everything I want about about this movie. It's what I love about this movie, and it's a great performance in this movie. But Mark, I'd love to ask you, do you have a scene that like really stands out to you?
I have a couple of them, and if you had asked me this before I did my rewatch last night, the one that I would have said that still is one of my favorites is the first time that Russell Crowe's character Maximus is kind of being herded into the pit, and then all of a sudden, boom, it's daylight, and there's a warning star coming right at the guy right in front of his face, and it's the first time that he does battle as a gladiator in that smaller arena, because, folks, look, a lot of people have tried to make movies that portray what stand-up comedy is like. None have done it better than Gladiator. That is the feeling. It's just, I love the sports movie aspect of that. I love the, obviously, like the ancient Rome feel of it, but it's just, it puts you right there. You're Mark, right there, and you're another gladiator about to go into it.
Mark, I've already given you the title of your sitcom. Now I'm going to give you the title of your biography. It's Stand-Up Gladiator, a Mark Ellis story.
That's the name of his next album as a follow-up to Dog Someday.
Yeah, and I can have it can be me in like full ancient Rome like garb. Like I can have like a sword and
full
sandals
speedo
and stuff.
Yep.
That'd be great.
You said you had a couple. Are there? What's some of the other ones that stand out to you?
So the other one that I really just noticed last night, or maybe I'd forgotten it, is it's just a small scene with Maximus and Juba and the really big gladiator guy. And they're all sitting around, and this is by the time that Maximus has already kind of shown that he's going to be the leader of the gladiators. and they're just sitting around eating. And he gets asked, about his battles. And he said, "You're going to go to Germania." And Russell Crowe just kind of looks and he's like, "I've been to many places." And they all just have a laugh because they're in this horrible situation that they probably have no hope to ever get out of. But the fact that they can just laugh because you got to laugh to stop from crying, I thought it's such a cool little moment between those three.
Ashley, is there any specific scene or a couple of scenes that stand out to you?
Yeah, there's two that are probably my favorite moments. The one is when we first see Lucilla and Marcus Aurelius walking together, and he gives her the whole speech about like, oh, if you'd only been born a man, and they have their little moment where they're like, Commodus sucks, and he goes, well, why don't we pretend that you're a doting daughter and that I'm a good father? And she goes, yes, that's a pleasant fantasy. I love that moment for them. It's her only, I think, real moment of humanity. She gets a lot of other really beautiful moments, but I think that's one of the only times we really get to see who she is. I also love the moment, and it's a moment that I hadn't really appreciated until we watched it last night. And Jason put it out to me, but I think it's just like absolutely brilliant when the gladiators are training and they're sort of all systematically going up against that big, tall German dude who plays that big, tall German stuntman and everything. And it's Maximus's turn, and the way he just flicks down the practice sword like it's nothing, like his life is worth so little to him, because a different actor, a broader actor in a different movie would have spat or would have thrown it at the guy, but it's just so not worth his time. And to me, it perfectly illustrates a tired soldier. And I think that tells you everything that you need to know about him. So those are like my two favorite moments, but they're not terribly exciting moments in the movie.
And that's the interesting thing about this movie. And we talked about a little bit earlier how this movie is... It's tiptoeing in both these worlds of like it's a prestige award movie, but it's definitely an action movie. Like there are huge action sequences in this, but I found it's interesting that like kind of all of us here, with the exception of the dumping into the pit, like all picked character moments for our favorite scenes almost.
Well, as Jason Inman is fond of pointing out about superheroes, that's what you watch a movie for human connections. Yeah, we like a good fight scene. Well, I'll talk about that Daredevil hallway fight till we pass away, but...
Yeah. Well, it's like if all we cared about in superhero movies was the fights, we just watch MMA.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things that whether it's a comic book movie or it's a Star Wars movie or something like this, especially as modern day audiences, we've been so inundated with great battle scenes. Like we are spoiled rotten when it comes to these sweeping shots of swords and shields and all this cool stuff. And so what really separates a bad movie from a good movie or a good movie from a great movie is those in-between things that we used to consider the filler in between battles. But now I think it's as adults, you're like, oh no, that's the emotion associated with that. And it's that stuff that elevates the sweeping battle scenes. So without all of those little character moments, we don't care about the battle as much.
Very agreed. Very well said. All right, let's talk about when this movie moves to Rome, because I think the first time that these gladiators enter the Colosseum, I mean, that was in every trailer for this movie. It's interesting enough, in the fun facts, they only built the first like 5 rows of that Colosseum, and everything above that is just complete CGI, and it mostly holds up. Like the Colosseum, I'd say about for like 90% of this movie looks amazing.
It's only when you see flags and banners waving in the wind because they're too shiny. And now we're smart enough and adept enough with CG to know that I think it doesn't hold up. But I mean, that shot is iconic for a reason.
It's so interesting to me because we don't get to Rome in this movie until about an hour and a half into this thing.
Can you talk about your feelings about when we should have first seen Rome really quick?
Oh, okay. So Mark, I have this theory about this movie that, of course, like I can tell an Oscar-winning Best Picture how to be better. Like the person on the internet that I am. No, I love this movie a lot, just full bias out there. And I've thought about this movie quite a bit in terms of like my writing and how they decided to do certain things. And I've always had the theory that I wondered why we see Rome before Maximus sees it, especially since there's a scene very early on in this movie where Marcus Aurelius is talking to Maximus and he says, "But you have never seen Rome. You've never seen it." And I've kind of always wondered how we would view this movie or how differently we might empathize with Maximus if the first time we see Rome is when he sees it. Because every time,
metropolis,
Yeah, well, every time we cut away from Maximus in the sticks, at his amateur gladiator nights,
away from the only metropolis in the entire world at that point.
Yeah, basically, it's always those scenes I feel never work as well as the scenes in Rome once Maximus gets there. Because once Maximus gets there, it's all about the intrigue, and Maximus is sort of this like nuclear story bomb that if the right character activates him, it upends Rome.
That's very interesting to think about, that we could have seen Rome just through his eyes. And I'm trying to think of, I guess the reason why they didn't do it is because maybe they want to show the audience what Rome is like without a Maximus figure there to, in essence, save it to some degree, versus what Rome will be like if Maximus lives up to his destiny.
I also think you have to, by that point, we haven't seen Commodus for a hot minute, so it has to be like, remember, he's the bad guy. This is why we're coming to Rome.
Mm-hmm. I think Ashley's probably right.
Yeah, I have a feeling that was exactly, like, to me, to be honest with you, it sort of feels like a studio note to be like, what about this Commodus guy? We haven't seen him in a while.
What are we paying Joaquin Phoenix for anyway?
By the way, we need more of his POV.
You want him to make out with his sister? Sounds great.
You know what? It's so funny you bring that up, because when I put on the director's cut, I was really nervous that it was just going to be 25 more minutes of brother-sister makeout time. And I'm like, I don't need this. But as soon as we get the more battle shots, I'm like, yes, more war. It's better than brother-sister makeout.
When it's really funny that you brought that up, because Jason brought that up last night. He was like, how come in like ancient movies and medieval time it's always brothers and sisters making out? Like Game of Thrones does that. And it was kind of funny that you had pointed that out, because I didn't realize that it was that much of a trend. But I guess
it is.
It's our shorthand to be like, see, they were heathens.
They didn't know about genetics. Whoa. We talk about getting to Rome and all the supporting characters. We have to talk about Derek Jacobi, one of the greatest. He's still living, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I was pretty certain about that.
He was in Tolkien, which came out last year at the time of this recording.
Derek Jacobi as Senator Gracchus, who I feel is giving a lot of kind of goofy lines in this movie, but every scene he is in is just astounding. He takes some silly, like, he has a line for me that really doesn't work in this movie, and I kind of feel they only wrote it into this movie to put it in the trailer, where he's like, the power of Rome is on the sands of the Colosseum, and I'm like, what? That doesn't make sense at all. Why is it with the slaves? Mark, what do you feel about Senator Gracchus? And I guess basically all the other senators and other vagabonds we meet once we get to Rome.
I love Derek Jacobi's look so much. I think it's such a great, you can almost see his face on a statue in ancient Rome. It's just got that look to it. So you instantly buy him in this role, for me anyway. And he's been a great actor for generations. But I think that what it shows is that, for me anyway, it's the first time that I'm watching this movie, and I think that we actually have hope for this slave now to rise up against what he's facing, which is Commodus, is that it seems like other people in authority positions, people of influence, are not that enthralled with this emperor, and so they may actually listen to somebody in Maximus's position.
Now, I also want to talk about the ending of this movie. The final fight is between Commodus and Maximus. And rewatching it last night, it seems for a lot of the fight, it was actually Joaquin Phoenix and Russell Crowe.
Oh, I was super impressed by that, because not every actor can fight, and not every actor can fight well. And there is a lot of quick cuts in there. We're not seeing it from a medium, but they look like they're doing a good job. And Jason, you pointed this out. Even when we're seeing Commodus doing his choreographed training in Germania, that's all Joaquin Phoenix, and he does it really well.
Mark, what did you feel about the final fight between Commodus and Maximus?
It's just that one that you're looking forward to the whole movie, but and this is something that I actually forgot because I knew that they had some sort of battle, and I'm like, wait a minute, how did this movie trick my brain into thinking that Commodus even had a chance against Maximus? And then you see he stabs him in the back, and he's just covered up, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, he's playing an injured man. But it's just I totally agree with Ashley, is that the choreography is so good, and this is also one of those first movies that use those quick, like, Bourne Identity style, kind of jerky camera movements to. It doesn't feel like to mask the lack of fighting ability on the actors' parts, but just to give it that extra kinetic quality. And I thought it played really well.
All right, so I want to talk about something that when I first watched this movie in the theaters, I was completely blindsided, did not predict the fact that we were going to see Maximus basically walk into the afterlife. And that setup, that perfect setup of the hand in the field of wheat, which actually, by the way, fun fact, was added in post-production. It was never planned to do that, to open the movie with that shot until editing.
Wow, really?
And it's crazy to me because I think a lot of the legacy of this movie is that shot. But I remember being in the movie theater and being completely surprised. And I will say, rewatching it last night, I think when the music comes in and you see the moments, Russell Crowe does a really good job about choosing the moments where he's like lost in Elysium and he's actually present. And I think the death of Maximus really, really works. Ashley, what do you think about the whole Elysium ending and Maximus's death?
I think it's really, really stunning. And I think a lesser movie with a lesser performance, it could be so silly. Like the reach for the door could be just ridiculous. But I like Elysium as a version of heaven.
Not the Matt Damon Elysium, right?
No.
Okay,
I had to pause and think about that. He's like the only white person in that whole movie.
Yep, and it's set in South Africa.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, South Africa is full of white people. Calling out you colonizers, says the child of a colonizer. It's a great end scene. I also like that it basically reprises when he's trying to get home, but now he's getting his just reward. I think that's very nice. Overblown, but very nice.
Also the style of the time.
Yes.
Mark, how did you feel about Maximus's sort of walk through the afterlife?
It added that quality that we've been talking about, where it's not this huge battle scene. It's this quiet moment of peace in a movie called Gladiator. And I think it stands out because that's what separates this movie from any of the other cookie cutter sword and sandals films that might have a cool epic battle scene, but that just gives it its extra weight, and it makes you think about things outside of the Colosseum, outside of the battle. It makes you consider every aspect of life. And so many times when we're watching like an action sequence, we're just thrilled in the moment, but this really gives you a glimpse as to, in a way, what all of these people are fighting for in the first place.
Okay. We've come to the time where I'm going to ask you the most important question I'm going to ask you this entire podcast. Russell Crowe won Best Actor at the 73rd Annual Academy Awards for Gladiator. Now, many people believe that Russell Crowe, that this was sort of a previous year accolade because he was also nominated the year before for The Insider. And everybody thought he was going to win for The Insider. He did not. He won the next year for Gladiator. Mark, does Russell Crowe deserve Best Actor for this movie?
Okay, we all are aware that the Oscars loves makeup calls, but I'm trying to think of
I can tell you who he was against, actually, if that helps.
Yeah, because if he was against, I know that one year Denzel should have gotten it and lost it to somebody. Because I think Denzel should have won for The Hurricane, but then there was something else he was up for. Who else was Russell going against?
So Russell Crowe, for the 73rd Annual Academy Awards, was against Javier Bardem for Before Night Falls. He was against Tom Hanks for Castaway. He was against Ed Harris for Pollock. And he was against Jeffrey Rush for Quills.
Oh, Pollock is really good.
Pollock is really good. I think that they didn't give it to Tom Hanks in Castaway because they'd already given him 2. And if you put Russell Crowe versus Tom Hanks, Tom Hanks, he gets so many points in my book because I love Castaway. And
I do love that movie as well.
It's such an amazing performance by Tom Hanks. And then if you had a tiebreaker, maybe you go physical transformation. But I mean, Russell Crowe, as we've seen from Russell Crowe since Gladiator, this is not an easy role to pull off physically either. Okay? It's tough to get in maximum shape. So I think that I'm fine with Russell Crowe having an Oscar on his shelf. I think he's a great actor, and I think that it would be deserved for Gladiator. It's a tough call, but I'll allow it.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think he deserves it. I know I'm not mad about it the way I've been mad about other people winning in the past.
I will say for that list, I think he deserves it of the bunch.
Yeah.
Kevin Spacey robbed him of the Oscar the year before for American Beauty. So with that being settled, who do you think gives the best performance in this movie of all of the entire cast? Is it Russell Crowe, or do you think somebody else edges him out? Ashley, do you have any thoughts on this?
I just want to say Richard Harris. It's so hard not to want to. He's just so magnificent. I don't know who Joaquin was against this year, but I think he really should have gotten it. I know there's also. So Jason very kindly pulled up the list. Benicio won for Traffic. Jeff Bridges was nominated for The Contender. Willem Dafoe for Shadow of the Vampire. Albert Finney from Erin Brockovich. Well, I haven't seen most of these movies.
I think Albert Finney should have won that year.
I just really love Albert Finney. But there's even like a scene where he ad-libs and it's in the movie and it's incredible. I don't know if I think Russell Crowe is the best, but I think he's pretty wonderful.
Mark, who do you feel is the best actor in this movie?
I would probably lean towards going with Russell Crowe, but Jamon Hunsu, I forgot how great he is in the movie with very little dialogue to get his point across. I thought his facial expressions are so good.
Yes.
And Oliver Reed, I would put way up there too. I think Oliver Reed is phenomenal.
I mean, for me, it's Oliver Reed. I think Oliver Reed takes a lot of goofy action movie lines and makes them amazing.
I mean, you do love Proxima.
I do love Proxima. Okay, so Mark, I want to ask you a couple of questions here. What do you think is basically the overall theme or message of this movie? What do you think this movie is trying to tell us? And what do you think is this movie's legacy? Does it hold up for a movie that came out in 2000?
I'll answer your question backwards. I think the legacy of this movie is that it set a standard for ancient Rome-based films that has yet to be equaled since it came out. And I feel like the message of this movie, if I was doing my 10th grade book report, I would probably say that it just comes from Maximus's lips himself when he says, what we do in life echoes in eternity. Now, when he says it, he's trying to pump his guys up for battle and to try to let them know, hey, guys, if you die, it's okay. We just need to get through this thing with a W. But when you look at everybody in the film and what their motivations are, you can see by the end of the film that, yeah, what you're doing right now and what kind of a person you are, what your moral character is made out of, what your fiber holds, that is going to echo well past this lifetime. So make your decisions wisely because you're going to have to live as this person for eternity.
Ashley, what do you think is the legacy of this movie? What do you think this movie is trying to tell us?
I mean, the legacy of this movie is that Russell Crowe can keep throwing phones at people and still be employed. all the way to The Nice Guys, which I think is also a great movie and apparently recently came on streaming at the time of this recording.
That's the line of the podcast right there.
I just don't know if I could sum it up better than you, Mark, so I had to try to be funny. I think that...
Well, I cheated. I got the question asked first, so I could just rip the line from Maximus. Like, that's like every senior quote in the year 2000, 2001.
I also think the reason that people respond to this is a very classic underdog story, and we do love an underdog, and also because it's so far removed from the world that we live in around us that nobody is going to go into this movie and say, yeah, but you know what? I think Commodus was right. There's no kind of room for arguing. And I think that's why people like it and find it inspiring, because we all want to believe that no matter what happens, if we have to start from the bottom, we can do it and everyone will recognize that we are right. And I think that's a very powerful story to tell. And it's a powerful story to tell and have recognized the way that it was. Jason?
I think Mark nailed the legacy of this movie. There is no movie since this has sort of, I would even say ancient world movie. I would like expand that out past Rome. I don't think any kind of ancient world, like 100 to 500 AD movie has beaten this in terms of quality and just story and acting and everything.
And this is the time where we announce the Kickstarter for our upcoming comedy historical classic. In the making.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. News to me.
Yeah.
Everyone gets a free pair of sandals. Okay.
Yeah. Mark's doing punch-ups for us. It's going to be great.
Oh, all right. Thank God. That's why we call him the stand-up gladiator.
Whatever y'all need, I am happy to provide. I do love, Ashley, your point about how like nobody is leaving that movie having any sympathy for communists. It's pretty amazing that I know you haven't seen Joker yet, but it's like that new Joker, you actually leave that movie having more sympathy for a Batman villain than you do leaving Joaquin Phoenix's character in Gladiator. Because you're right,
that is a very fair point. For me, I would think I've always seen this movie as there's a statement that is said very early in the movie and it's echoed at the very end. When talking with Marcus Aurelius, Maximus says, I fight for this. I fight for Rome and the idea of Rome. And that's where Marcus Aurelius calls him and says, you haven't even seen it. And Maximus replies with, I will not believe that my men died for nothing. And at the end of the movie, when he's dying, he says, there was an idea that was Rome. I think we should return to it or something like this. He says something very similar. And it's funny to me because I think at the end of the movie, they're telling us the message where he says there was an idea that was Rome and then it cuts to Elysium. And I think it's not the idea that because no man fights for your country, you fight for your family. And I think it is this whole idea of that the idea of Rome or the idea of your country, the idea of your government is different for every single person. And for Maximus, it is his family. It has nothing to do with Rome. And I kind of feel like that is the reason why we sort of connect to this movie is because everything that Maximus does in this movie, even when he's brutally killing people or doing all these kinds of things, is all for his wife and son.
It's a great point because anybody who does something motivated out of selfish reasons in this movie is the bad person. And anybody who's doing something on behalf of someone else's welfare or to somebody else's benefit, those are the ones that we tend to be like, oh yeah, that's a protagonist versus who an antagonist is.
Yeah, and that's a great way to sum it up. All right, everybody out there, as you know, every week we usually do recommended reading. Ashley, where can they find that?
You can find that by going to geekhistorylesson.com/recommended reading. We have handy dandy little Amazon widgets there. You go click on that. Jeff Bezos gives us money at no extra cost to you. So go buy Gladiator, why don't you?
Yeah, and we'll have a couple extra Gladiator books, probably the soundtrack in there.
Yes.
Go check it all out. Don't forget to subscribe and listen to this podcast everywhere that you can put podcasts in your ear holes, especially on Spotify. And Mark, thank you for being such an amazing guest. Where can everybody find you online and find your shows whenever we're allowed to go back out into shows again?
As usual, you can find me just clinging to y'all's coattails. I can be found on social media at Mark Ellis Live. And Jason's right. Whenever we get back to, feeling comfortable in public and not maintaining social distance, then I will be on the first stage I can find. And you can probably bet Jason and Ashley are going to be sitting somewhere in the front row because they know I need my validation for my comic book joke.
I'm very good at a thumbs up in the darkness. Don't forget, you can forget Geek History Lesson everywhere on social media. Ashley, where can they do that?
You can do that at facebook.com/Geek History Lesson, on Twitter at GHL Podcast, or geekhistorylesson.com always.
Don't forget to follow Ashley on Instagram and Twitter at Ashley V. Robinson. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Jawiin. That's Jawiin. And don't forget to go support the Patreon, patreon.com/Jawiin, where we're going to blow Mark's mind with what they were considering for the sequels to Gladiator. I'm not even joking, everybody. It is one of these ideas is so bonkers it hurts. It hurts.
I kind of remember it. I think it was like a movie talk story or something. So yeah, y'all definitely check out their Patreon because I cannot wait to talk about this.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to Geek History Lesson this week. Mark, thank you again for joining us.
I will see y'all soon. Let's do dinner again. Let's do drinks. Let's do it all. I miss you kids.
Yes, we miss you as well, especially with all the thumbs up. And I am Jason, still not a Gladiator Inman.
I am Ashley Victoria Robinson. And Professor Jason, would you please dismiss the Coliseum?
Were you not entertained? If you weren't, then shut off the damn podcast.